The heavy base of the wine glass was cool against Layla's palm as she polished it, her movements a slow, practiced circle. A linen cloth, worn soft from 100 washes, was the only thing making a sound in the cathedral quiet of the dining room. It was the specific hush that fell around 8 o'clock every Tuesday and Thursday. Not the comfortable silence of a satisfied room, but the tense, held-breath quiet of a forest when a predator is near. The source of the silence was Table 7. It sat in the far corner, a small island of starched white cloth and gleaming silver, occupied by a single man. From her station, Layla could only see his back, the severe, perfect cut of his charcoal suit. The other waiters moved around the periphery of his table like nervous birds, their paths bending to give it a wide berth. They refilled water glasses at adjacent tables with trembling hands, their eyes refusing to look directly at him. Her manager, a perpetually sweating man named Jean-Pierre, had explained the rules her first week. Table 7 is to be left alone unless he signals. He is particular. Particular was not the word the kitchen staff used. They used words like demon and iceman. They called him the Oyabun, the boss. They whispered that he was Run Ishikawa, the head of the Ishikawa Gumi, a notorious Japanese mafia boss whose influence stretched from the docks of Tokyo to the boardrooms of this very city. They said he didn't speak, he commanded. He didn't eat, he presided. And he never ever smiled. Tonight, Marco, who usually took the corner section, had conveniently come down with a migraine. Sophia had a tray of glasses slip from her hands just thinking about it. Now, Jean-Pierre was looking at her, his face a mask of polite desperation. Layla was new, 20 years old, working 2 jobs to pay for tuition, with a spine forged from her grandmother's stubborn love. She was too new to be properly afraid. Layla, Jean-Pierre began, his voice a low plea. Mr. Ishikawa has signaled for his check. Marco is indisposed. Layla stopped polishing. She placed the glass carefully on the rack, its crystal ringing softly in the charged air. She met her manager's gaze, her own steady and calm. She untied the stained apron from her waist and folded it, replacing it with a crisp, clean one reserved for serving. Of course, she said, her voice even. The simple act of agreement made Jean-Pierre flinch, as if she'd just volunteered to walk into a lion's den. Perhaps she had. She picked up the small leather billfold from the service stand, the embossed gold of the restaurant's name feeling impossibly fragile in her hand. Then, she began the long walk to Table 7. With each step, the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to recede, funneled away until the only sounds were the soft tap of her sensible shoes on the polished floor and the frantic thrumming in her own ears. The air grew colder around the table, a pocket of winter in the warm, amberlit room. He didn't look up as she approached. He was focused on the small, empty porcelain bowl before him, his posture immaculate, a study in stillness and control. His hands rested on the table, one on either side of the bowl. They were beautiful hands, elegant and clean, but there was a tension in them, a coiled strength that hinted at immense, restrained power. A single, heavy gold ring, unadorned and ancient-looking, was on his right pinky finger. His black hair was cut with razor precision, and from this angle, she could see the sharp line of his jaw. He was younger than she'd expected. Not old and grizzled like the mob bosses in movies, but perhaps in his early 30s, his face unlined but carrying a weight that aged him. Layla stopped beside the table, waiting.
She did not speak.
The silence stretched, thick and deliberate. It was a test, she knew. A power play. He was waiting for her to stammer, to fidget, to break. She simply stood, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, her breathing even. She thought of her grandmother in the kitchen, waiting for bread to rise. Patience was a language she understood. It's strange, isn't it? How a simple moment of quiet can feel more dangerous than a scream. We've all been there, in that charged silence, waiting for the other person to make the first move. What's the longest you've ever held a silence, just to see what would happen? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're ready for this silence to break. Finally, without lifting his gaze from the bowl, he spoke. His voice was low, a gravelly baritone with the faintest trace of an accent. "You are new," it was not a question. It was a statement of fact. "Yes, sir," she replied. Her voice did not tremble. He lifted his head. His eyes met hers, and the air left her lungs in a silent rush. They were dark, almost black, and shockingly perceptive. They weren't cruel, not exactly. They were empty, a profound, desolate emptiness that seemed to absorb all the light in the room. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for a long, unnerving moment. He took in her neatly tied head wrap, the small silver hoops in her ears, the determined set of her mouth. He was seeing her, not as a uniform, but as a person. And she saw him, too. Not just the fearsome Japanese mafia boss, but a man drowning in a quiet of his own making. She placed the leather folder gently on the table, to the right of his hand. He didn't look at it. His eyes remained on hers. "The others are afraid of you," she said, the words leaving her mouth before she could stop them. It was a foolish, dangerous thing to say. A direct challenge. Jean-Pierre would have fainted. But the words felt true, and Layla had been raised to speak the truth, even when it was difficult. A flicker of something, surprise? Interest, moved in the depths of his dark eyes. It was there, and gone in a second. He said nothing. He simply reached for the billfold, his movements economical and precise. He opened it, glanced at the total, and placed a black credit card inside. As he slid it back across the table, his fingers brushed against hers. It was not a touch. It was less than that. The barest whisper of contact, a spark of unexpected warmth against the chill of the room. Her body registered it like a jolt. She took the folder and walked away, her back straight, feeling his gaze on her every step of the way. In the kitchen, the cooks and dishwashers watched her with wide eyes as she ran the card. They saw the name on the receipt. R. Ishikawa. The total was for $150. He had only ordered a simple bowl of oyakodon and a glass of water. The dish, a home-style chicken and egg rice bowl, wasn't even on the menu. It was something the head chef, a man who feared nothing but bad reviews, made for him personally, his hands shaking slightly as he cooked. It was a peasant's meal, a dish of comfort and memory, a bizarre choice for a man of his stature in a place like this. It was a puzzle, a piece that didn't fit the picture of the cold, ruthless mafia boss. When she returned with the slip for him to sign, he had already risen. His bodyguard, a mountain of a man with a face like a stone carving who had been standing sentinel by the door, now held his coat. Ren Ishikawa signed the slip with a swift, elegant flick of a fountain pen, the ink a stark, black slash on the white paper. He pushed it toward her without a word and turned to leave. Layla picked it up. In the tip line, he had written a single, neat figure, $1,000. She stood there, holding the slip, long after he was gone. The money was shocking, of course. It was more than her monthly rent. But it wasn't the amount that stunned her into silence. It was the gesture. It wasn't a tip.
It was a statement.
A message.
But what was it saying?
Was it a reward for her courage? A dismissal? A way of marking her? The other waiters crowded around, their fear momentarily forgotten in the face of such an obscene amount of money. Their whispers filled the air. A grand? For what? Did he say anything to you? You're lucky he didn't have you killed. Layla folded the slip and put it in her pocket. The warmth of his near touch still lingered on her fingertips. Later, as he was shrugging into his coat, his bodyguard, Tatsu, holding it for him, he paused in the grand doorway of the restaurant. He looked back, his gaze sweeping the room until it found her. She was clearing his table, carefully stacking the empty bowl and water glass onto her tray. For a single, suspended moment, their eyes met again across the expanse of the dining room. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, of recognition. Then he turned and was gone, swallowed by the New York night. Layla let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her heart was still beating too fast. It was not fear. It was something else. Something warm and complicated and full of things that didn't have names yet. Something shifted in the quiet corner of the restaurant that night. A pattern was broken. A new one had just begun. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that he would be back. And that next time he would ask for her. The walk home through the sleeping city streets felt different. The familiar rumble of the subway, the distant wail of a siren. It all seemed muted, distant. Her world had tilted on its axis, and she was still trying to find her balance. The first thing she did when she got back to her tiny apartment was call her best friend. Keisha picked up on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Layla? What's wrong? Is it Mrs. Henderson's cat again?" "No," Layla said, sinking onto her worn sofa. She laughed, a real, full laugh that felt like a release. It sounded too loud in the small room. Something happened at work. She told her everything. The silent, terrifying man. The whispers of him being a Japanese mafia boss. The fear of the other staff. The bizarrely simple food order. The $1,000 tip. Keisha was silent for a long moment. Then, her voice, sharp with alarm, cut through the line. "Layla. Layla, are you listening to me? A mafia boss? $1,000? Girl, you need to quit that job.
Right now.
Hand in your notice tomorrow. This is not the kind of trouble you need." "It's not trouble," Layla said, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it herself. He was just quiet. Quiet? Drug lords are quiet. Serial killers are quiet. "Layla, this is New York, not a movie. Men like that, they don't just give away money. They buy things.
People.
You need to stay away from him." Layla looked around her small apartment. The framed photo of her grandmother on the wall, her smile wide and knowing. The stack of textbooks on her coffee table. The worn-out pot she used to make the oxtail stew that tasted of home. Her life was simple, ordered, and safe. Ren Ishikawa was none of those things. He was a disruption, a storm cloud on the horizon. And yet, she wasn't afraid. She was curious. That's the thing about a story like this, isn't it? The safe choice is always obvious. We can all see the red flags. But there's a part of us that whispers, what if? What if the monster in the story isn't a monster at all? Which side are you on right now? Team Keisha screaming run away? Or are you like Layla leaning in, wanting to know more? Let me know which character you relate to most right now. I have a feeling this is where our story really begins. She thought of his eyes, that profound emptiness. She thought of the oyakudon, a dish her own grandmother would have called soul food. It was a contradiction, a puzzle she wanted to solve. "I can handle myself, Kay," she said softly. "He's just a customer," but even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. He was not just a customer. He was a pivotal moment, a door opening into a world she knew nothing about. And she had already stepped through it. 2 nights later, he returned. The hush fell at precisely 8 o'clock. He sat at the same table, a solitary figure in another impeccably tailored suit. Jean-Pierre approached Layla, his face pale. "He is here," he whispered, as if speaking of a ghost. "And he is asking for you." Layla's heart gave a little skip. She smoothed down her apron, her hands steady. "I'll be right there." This time, the walk to the table felt different. Less like a march to her doom, and more like a reunion. He was watching her approach, his dark eyes following her every move. He did not look away. When she reached his side, she gave a small nod. "Mr. Ishikawa." "Welcome back, Layla," he said. Her name. He said her name, and it sounded like a secret, a possession. The formal "sir" she had used before suddenly felt ridiculous. "The usual?" she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. For the first time, she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. It wasn't a smile, not even close, but it was the suggestion of one, a ghost of an expression that was more intimate than a full grin would have been. "Yes," he said, "the usual." And so the ritual began. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he would arrive at 8. He would sit at table 7. He would ask for Layla. She would bring him his oyakudon and a glass of water. They rarely spoke more than a few words. But their silences were different now. They were not tense and challenging, but comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. She learned the rhythm of his presence. The way he would pause before the first bite, his eyes closing for a fraction of a second. The precise, deliberate way he used his chopsticks. The way he always left the last grain of rice in the bowl. She started noticing more. the faint, almost invisible scar that traced the line of his left eyebrow, the scent of sandalwood and winter air that clung to him. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his posture, the minute tightening of his jaw that meant he was tense, the slight relaxation of his shoulders that meant what? She didn't know. He, in turn, watched her. His gaze would follow her as she moved through the restaurant, a silent, protective wait. One evening, he broke the pattern. "The wine list," he said, his voice startling her. She brought it to him. He studied it for a long moment, then looked up at her. "What do you recommend?" It was a simple question, but it was the first time he had asked for her opinion. The first time he had acknowledged her as more than just a server. "For what?" she asked. "For a man who has forgotten what good things taste like," he said, his voice so low she barely heard it. The moment was interrupted. A man in a slick, expensive suit, his smile too wide and predatory, broke from the bar and started walking towards their table. Layla felt the temperature drop 3 degrees. She saw the shift in Rin immediately. The quiet stillness hardened into something lethal. His eyes, fixed on the approaching man, became flat and cold. Before the man could get within 10 feet, Tatsu, the bodyguard, materialized from the shadows near the entrance. He moved with a speed that was terrifying for a man his size. He didn't run. He simply appeared, a wall of muscle and dark intent, blocking the man's path. Tatsu said nothing. He just stood there. The smiling man's confidence evaporated. His face went slack with fear. He opened his mouth, then closed it. A low, guttural exchange in Japanese passed between Tatsu and the man. Layla couldn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was a threat, delivered with the quiet finality of a death sentence. The man turned, his face ashen, and practically fled the restaurant. The entire exchange took less than 30 seconds. The other diners, caught in their own worlds, noticed nothing. But Layla had seen it all. She saw the mask of civility slip from Ren's face, revealing the dangerous power that lay just beneath the surface. He was not just a quiet, sad man. He was the Japanese Mafia boss everyone whispered about. A man who commanded violence with a glance. He looked at her then, his expression guarded, searching her face for fear, for repulsion. He expected her to recoil, to finally see him as the monster and run. Layla held his gaze. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage, but she did not look away. She slowly reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and pushed the wine list back towards him. "The 98 Bordeaux," she said, her voice a little shaky but clear. "It tastes like patience." He stared at her, his dark eyes wide with a raw, unguarded emotion she couldn't name. It was vulnerability. He had shown her the truth of who he was, and she had not flinched. She had stayed. In that moment, the space between them collapsed. The table, the restaurant, the entire city fell away, and it was just the two of them, caught in a silence that was more profound than any words could ever be. He nodded slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders. "The Bordeaux," he repeated softly. "Yes." That night, a storm broke over the city. Rain lashed against the tall windows of the restaurant, blurring the glittering lights of the skyline into a watercolor painting. The last of the diners had long since departed, seeking shelter from the downpour. Jean-Pierre, eager to get home, had let the rest of the staff go, leaving only Layla to close up. Run was still at his table. He hadn't moved. He just sat there, watching the rain, the untouched glass of Bordeaux in front of him. The room was quiet save for the rhythmic drumming of the storm and the soft clinking of cutlery as Layla cleared the last tables. She worked slowly, deliberately, drawing out the task. She didn't want the night to end. When she was done, she wiped her hands on her apron and walked over to his table. "We're closing up, Mr. Ishikawa," she said gently. He looked up at her, his face shadowed in the dim light. "Sit," he said. It was not a command. It was a request. She hesitated for a moment, then pulled out the chair opposite him and sat down. They sat in silence, watching the rain together. The storm felt like a reflection of the turmoil inside both of them. It was a wild, cleansing, dangerous thing. It feels like the whole world stops during a moment like that, doesn't it? When the rain is coming down and you're safe inside with someone who sees you. There's a magic in those quiet, stormy nights. It's when the truth comes out. Have you ever had a moment like that? A conversation that could only happen when the rest of the world was washed away by rain?
Tell me about it.
I want to hear the story of your storm. I do not like the rain, he said finally, his voice rough. It reminds me of the day my wife died. The confession hung in the air between them, stark and heavy. Layla's breath caught in her throat. This was the source of the emptiness in his eyes. The grief he carried like a shroud. She didn't offer platitudes or condolences. The words would have been cheap, meaningless. Instead, she just listened, giving him the gift of her quiet presence. He began, his voice cracking slightly. He stopped, composing himself. The effort it took was immense. She could see it in the tightening of his hands. She was the one who taught me how to make oyakodon relief. That's what the simple dish was. It was memory. It was love. It was a prayer to a ghost. My grandmother taught me how to make oxtail stew, Layla found herself saying, her voice soft. She said it was good for the soul, that it tasted like home. He looked at her, and for the first time, the emptiness in his eyes was filled with something else. A deep, aching sadness, but also recognition. A shared understanding of loss, of how food and memory are woven together so tightly you can't separate them. He slowly reached his hand across the table, his fingers uncurling. He didn't touch her. He just left his hand there, palm up, in the space between them. An offering. An invitation. She watched his hand, the long, elegant fingers, the coiled strength. She lifted her own, her heart pounding. Her fingers hovered just above his, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his skin. The almost touch. It was more powerful, more charged with longing than any kiss. A week later, he arrived at his usual time, but he was not alone. Holding his hand was a small girl, no older than 5 or 6. She was a miniature version of him, with the same serious black eyes and straight, dark hair cut in a neat bob. She clutched a large, worn sketchbook to her chest like a shield and walked with a solemn dignity that was both endearing and heartbreaking. The restaurant staff froze. A child. The Japanese Mafia boss had brought a child. It was an image so incongruous it felt like a dream. Tatsu followed a few paces behind them, his stony expression somehow softer as he watched the girl. Rin led her to table 7, pulling out a chair for her with a gentleness Layla had never seen in him. The little girl sat, placing her sketchbook carefully on the table. Rin caught Layla's eye, a question in his gaze. She gave him a warm, reassuring smile and walked over. "Good evening," she said, her voice soft so as not to startle the child. The little girl looked up at her, her dark eyes wide and curious. She was not afraid. "This is my daughter," Rin said, his voice laced with a quiet pride. "Hannah." "Hello, Hannah," Layla said, crouching down slightly to be on her level. "My name is Layla." "It's very nice to meet you." Hannah didn't speak. She simply opened her sketchbook and turned it around, pushing it across the table for Layla to see. It was a crayon drawing of a man with black hair and a woman with a bright, sunny smile, holding hands under a cherry blossom tree. The colors were vibrant, full of life. It was a drawing of a happy memory. Layla felt a lump form in her throat. "This is beautiful, Hannah," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Did you draw this?" Hannah nodded solemnly. Rin watched the exchange, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He was showing Layla the most vulnerable part of himself, the reason for the walls around his heart. Hannah was his world, and she was trusting Layla with her. Hannah then turned to a new page and began to draw again. Layla brought them their food, oyakodon for Ren and a small, specially prepared plate of tamagoyaki and rice for Hannah. As they ate, Hannah looked up from her plate, her crayon poised over her drawing. She looked at Layla, then at her father, then back at Layla. Then she asked a question, her small, clear voice cutting through the quiet of the restaurant. "Are you our new sunshine?" The question shattered the air. It was the kind of accidental, devastating profundity only a child could deliver. Rin choked on his water. Layla felt a blush creep up her neck, a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Our new sunshine, it was what Hannah must have called her mother. Layla looked at Ren, whose composure was completely undone. He looked lost, vulnerable, and utterly terrified. He was the most powerful man in the city's underworld, a feared Japanese mafia boss who could command death with a nod, and he was being brought to his knees by a child's crayon drawing and an innocent question. Before either of them could answer, Layla saw a flicker of movement by the front window. It was the man from the other night, the one with the predatory smile. He wasn't inside this time. He was across the street, standing under a street lamp, his face cold and sober. He was watching them, watching Hannah. Ren saw where she was looking. His entire demeanor shifted in an instant. The vulnerable father vanished, replaced by the Oyabun. The air turned to ice. A primal coldness emanated from him, a promise of brutal violence. He stood up slowly, his body a coiled spring of lethal intent. "Tatsu," he said, his voice a low growl. The bodyguard was already moving, his hand inside his jacket. "Layla," Ren said, turning to her. His eyes were black fire. "Take Hannah to the kitchen.
Now."
Do not let her out of your sight." It was a command forged in fear and fury. Fear for his child. Fury at the threat. Layla didn't hesitate. She scooped the little girl into her arms, sketchbook and all. Hannah wrapped her small arms around her neck, burying her face in Layla's shoulder, unafraid. She trusted her. As she hurried towards the swinging kitchen doors, she looked back. Ren was standing by the table, facing the front of the restaurant, a lone protector standing against the dark. He wasn't looking at the street. He was looking at her, at them. And in his eyes, she saw it all. The grief for what he'd lost, the terror of losing what he had left, and a fierce, desperate promise. A promise to protect. A promise that bound the three of them together in that single, silent gaze. The story doesn't end here, does it? It's just the beginning. The real danger has finally shown its face, and everything these three have built is on the line. What happens next? Does he confront the man? Does she manage to keep Hannah safe? The quiet restaurant has become a battleground, and everything is about to change. If you need to know what happens next, if you believe in the promise in his eyes, then subscribe and turn on notifications. The rest of their story is waiting.